it feels like we live in a very confusing times as regards to defining economic reality. Is it just me, or the institution are pushing one narrative, the mainstream media another kind of stories, independent free market capitalists a third one? What is your take on that?
I think you're dead right. There are different narratives because we are living in very fragmented times. So different people are pushing different narratives for different purposes. So we've seen the narrative of the stock market where everything looks okay. But the narrative of your friends and my friends who run businesses and restaurants and hairdressing salons, they're not okay. So the average person is not okay. The governments have been kind of claiming it's okay because they don't want to admit it. The central banks have been saying we should be fine, meanwhile printing enormous amounts of money, which tells you that they don't think it's fine. And then others have been talking about the insolvency issues that are outstanding. And then the central banks have also been stopping insolvencies in large companies by buying their corporate credit. So we've got this really weird market where there's no real signals and everybody's lost. Then everybody's fighting over economic restrictions versus non-restrictions over the virus. Everything has become political. I mean, literally every single thing. So there is more noise than there is signal. And I think everybody's struggling with that.
What would be your quick economic overview?
My economic overview is that I've thought that this will play out in three phases that I call the unfolding. The first phase was the liquidation phase that we saw into March. That's the, oh my God, everything's changed, sell everything. Mm-hmm. Then is the hope phase where people think it's going to be okay, this will go away. And then there's the reality, which I call the insolvency phase, which is what's exactly happening now is that the economy doesn't recover because the virus doesn't go away. The economic impacts are much longer. And the insolvencies, starting from the bottom, from the small businesses, rise through the system. We've seen the banking system in Europe under pressure from that. It recovered in recent days with a bit more hope, but it's been under pressure. We've seen bond yields come lower, of people have realized that this is going to go on longer than people expect. So my view is I don't look at what the stock market's doing. I look at what the bond market's telling us. You know, if you look at bond yields in Europe or bond yields in the US, they're falling and they're expressing concerns about the economy. Bonds tend to tell the truth, while equities tend to tell emotion. So I listen to the bond market more than I listen to that. So I really think this is a much more concerning situation. You and I were talking before about Christmas and the economic hit of Christmas and New Year. As you know, in Europe, it's a very big deal. Now, Europeans are generally a collective bunch, so they understand generally that society sometimes needs to sacrifice. So they will do it, and yes, there will be some, unrest, but people by and large do it for the good of society. But that has economic impacts. I mean, there is no way out of this, because if you don't do it, the death toll rises and people stay at home anyway. So, we've seen that. We saw it in Sweden versus Spain, one hard lockdown, one no lockdown. What happened was the Swedes stayed at home, same economic impact. So in the end, we just have to get through this.
The government's doing enough?
No. Problem is they can't afford to. I mean, really, this is the time for fiscal stimulus. You have to give. You shouldn't be helping those large corporations with big debts like General Electric. That should not be the job here. The central banks are doing that. We really should be helping the hairdresser and the restaurants and the local cafe and the local small businesses. Yeah, you can't stop retail in the high street because that was going away anyway. But people being penalized for something that is an external event, that's not because they took on too much debt, not because they were speculating, just because as a society we've had to take certain actions. Governments need to do more. The problem is how can they? They're already massively in debt. And we've seen, yes, the central banks have to monetize that debt, but that has its own unintended consequences because we already came into this with enormous debts.
Yeah.
So it's a problem. We've seen Italy over the weekend saying, well, they want to be forgiven for some of the increase in their debts already. And normally this kind of talk doesn't happen for another year or so after the crisis has started. So
yeah.
This is going to be bad.
Mm-hmm. Do you expect another debt forgiveness conference like it was like 100 years ago?
In some way, shape or form. I mean, we're hearing it from the IMF. We're hearing it from various other places that there's a move towards the central bank digital currencies, a move towards a new Bretton Woods. We've heard the ECB and others, particularly the IMF, talking about maybe if we were to, let's say, create a globalized currency that everybody could print, let's say, a random number, 50% of GDP all at the same time to fiscally stimulate. And because everybody does it at the same time, then you're not devaluing against each other, you devalue against gold and crypto. So listen, I think there's going to have to be a grand bargain somewhere, because if not, what's left for anybody's children? What life is left when everything is bankrupt? There has to be a solution at the end of this. We knew that was coming in 2008. We were really sure it was coming in 2012 when the European crisis hit. Now we're in the big one. That something has to change.
In the phase of phasing out of the globalization or its trends, do you realistically see the three centers of the world to come together, meaning the United States, China, and European Union, to come together and pull this off?
It depends. It depends how big the crisis is. And it depends, I think, on one factor. And it doesn't look like it right now, but if the dollar was to go back up again, then I think it would force people. The dollar is the thing that nobody can bear. That the US is 25% of world GDP, yet 80% of all trade is done in dollars. There's simply not enough dollars considering all the debts. And this is the real underlying problem here. It's that kind of dichotomy. Everybody knows it. The US obviously doesn't want to do anything about it, but it will do if the dollar's too strong, like the Plaza Accord. So somewhere within a crisis, whatever format that comes in, now we're in the middle of one now, but how bad it gets, that's when things can possibly change. Or we splinter into three blocks. That's possible too.